Lorian Gray was a relic of an era long gone. His weathered hands, calloused from decades of toil, tended to the sparse crops that barely clung to life in the desolate soil of the outer colony. Though his physical strength had waned, his voice carried the weight of 100 stories. Children often gathered around his modest home, a structure cobbled together from salvaged metal and scraps, to hear tales of Earth, a world most had only heard of in whispers. He spoke of sprawling forests, azure oceans, and skies untainted by the shadows of an oppressive empire. The Galactic Empire had ruled for generations, its grip tightening with every passing year. For the humans scattered across the galaxy, life under its reign was one of submission. Lorian's village, a forgotten outpost on the edges of Imperial space, was no exception. Patrol ships hovered constantly, enforcing curfews, seizing goods, and suppressing even the faintest hint of defiance. The colonists had learned to survive in silence, but Lorian's heart burned with a quiet defiance. One evening, the village square became the stage for yet another act of Imperial cruelty. Irikian enforcers, towering creatures with metallic exoskeletons and glowing red eyes, stormed into the settlement. Their commander, a cold and calculating officer, barked orders through a translator device. They demanded tribute, food, water, and laborers to fuel the Empire's endless conquests. A young boy stumbled under the weight of the rations he was forced to carry, his small frame collapsing in the dust. The Irikian commander sneered, lifting the boy by his collar as the villagers averted their gazes. Weak like all humans, the alien growled. Lorian stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with steel. Put him down. The crowd froze. No one dared speak against the Empire, let alone challenge an officer directly. The commander turned slowly, its eyes narrowing as it sized up the old man. And who are you to make demands? Just an old man who's seen enough of your kind? Lorian's gaze didn't waver. The Irikian's laughter echoed through the square, sharp and mocking. Perhaps you've lived too long, human. Let me rectify that. The moment passed in a blur. A beam of energy shot from the commander's weapon, striking Lorian squarely in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The villagers gasped, their collective grief held in trembling silence. The commander turned to the crowd, its voice cold and mechanical. Let this be a reminder, defiance will not be tolerated. As the enforcers marched away, the villagers gathered around Lorian's body. An elder whispered, her voice trembling with both sorrow and a glimmer of hope, they've made a grave mistake. His son. They don't know who his son is? Above the colony, the Imperial fleet hung like a guillotine, oblivious to the storm it had just unleashed. Lorian Gray was dead, but his legacy would soon roar to life in ways the Empire could never imagine. Dax Gray stared at the holoscreen, his face carved from stone, as the news of his father's death replayed in his mind. The report was brief, clinical, and indifferent, the way all Imperial communications were. Lorian Gray, a dissident, executed for refusing to comply with an Irikian officer. A minor incident in the grand machinery of the Empire, not worth a second thought. But to Dax, it was a spark igniting a firestorm. He sat in the command center of his battleship, Vengeance, the hum of the ship's engines a constant backdrop to his thoughts. Around him, his crew moved with precision, humans like himself who had turned their backs on the Empire's oppression. They were rebels, fugitives, and warriors, united by a singular purpose, to make the Empire pay for every injustice it had wrought. Dax was no stranger to death. He had been forged in the Empire's crucible, trained in their elite academies to be a soldier, a weapon. As a young recruit, he had embraced their doctrines, desperate to escape the suffocating poverty of his home colony. He had risen through the ranks quickly, earning commendations for his efficiency and ruthlessness. But it was on a distant battlefield that the scales had fallen from his eyes. He had been ordered to raise a human settlement suspected of harboring rebels. It wasn't the first time he'd carried out such an order, but something about the village, the screams of the children, the blank resignation in the eyes of the elderly, had pierced through his indoctrination. He had hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough to make him realize the truth. The Empire wasn't a beacon of order and progress. It was a machine of tyranny, grinding entire species beneath its heel. That moment of doubt had cost him his place in the Empire. Branded a traitor, he had fled with a stolen ship, gathering a crew of like-minded rebels along the way. Together, they had waged a silent war against the Empire, striking from the shadows and vanishing before retribution could follow. But this time there would be no subtlety, no retreat. This time it was personal. Set course for Darien 5, Dax ordered, his voice low but unyielding. His first officer, a stern-faced woman named Mara, hesitated. Dax, we can't just... They killed him, Dax interrupted, his gaze locking onto hers. My father. For nothing. They thought he was weak. Helpless. They need to understand what happens when they push too far. Mara nodded, the determination in Dax's eyes silencing her doubts. She turned to relay the order, and the ship's engines roared to life, propelling them toward the colony where Lorian Gray had drawn his last breath. Dax stood alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Memories of his father flooded his mind, the stories of Earth, the quiet strength in his voice, the way he had always believed in humanity's potential, even when the Empire sought to crush it. They've killed the man who taught me compassion, Dax muttered to himself. Now they'll meet the man without it? His fists clenched as he prepared for the battle to come. This wasn't just revenge, it was a message. The Empire had thought humanity broken, scattered, and defeated. Dax Gray intended to prove them wrong. The Vengeance slipped into orbit over Darien 5 under the cover of its advanced cloaking systems. On board, Dax's crew moved with the precision of seasoned warriors. Every motion, every word was purposeful. There was no room for error. Dax stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding, his mind focused on the task ahead. The plan was simple and brutal. Dismantle the Empire's local operations in one decisive strike. Darien 5 was a small colony, its imperial presence limited to a single fortified base. It was a symbol of control more than a strategic asset, but its destruction would send a clear message. Dax's first step was to sever the base's communication. Without the ability to call for reinforcements, the Irikian enforcers stationed there would be isolated and vulnerable. A team of saboteurs deployed from the Vengeance, slipping through the colony's outskirts to plant EMP charges at critical relay points. The charges detonated in unison, casting the Imperial base into chaos. Lights flickered and died, leaving the compound shrouded in darkness. Alarms blared as confused officers scrambled to restore order, their systems unresponsive. It was then that Dax struck. The Vengeance fired precision strikes at the base's defensive turrets, neutralizing them before they could lock onto his forces. Dax's ground team, heavily armed and disciplined, stormed the compound with ruthless efficiency. They moved like shadows, eliminating resistance before the enforcers could mount a proper defense. Inside the base, the Irikians were panicking. These were not the hardened soldiers of the Imperial Corps, they were enforcers stationed on the outskirts, complacent in their belief that no one would dare challenge them. Their arrogance was their downfall. Dax led the assault personally, his years of training and combat experience making him a force of nature on the battlefield. His presence was a reminder to the enforcers of the brutality they had taught him, now turned against them. With every step, he left destruction in his wake, his fury fueled by the memory of his father. The villagers watched from the shadows, their fear mingled with awe. They had never seen anyone stand against the Empire like this. To them, the Empire had always been an unassailable monolith, its enforcers untouchable. But now they saw that even the Empire could bleed. As the battle raged, Dax made his way to the central command hub. Inside, the Irikian commander who had executed Lorian cowered behind a barricade, barking orders to his subordinates. Dax breached the room with a blast from his rifle, his figure silhouetted in the doorway. The commander's arrogance faltered as he faced the man he had unknowingly wronged. You think you can defy the Empire? The alien sneered, though his voice betrayed his fear. I don't think, Dax replied coldly, his weapon trained on the trembling figure. I know. He didn't kill the commander, not yet. Instead, he bound him and forced him to watch as his forces dismantled the Empire's grip on the colony. Dax wanted him to see what defiance looked like, to carry the memory of it back to the Empire as a warning. When the battle was over, the Imperial base lay in ruins. The villagers emerged from their homes, cautiously approaching the scene of devastation. Dax stood in the center of the wreckage, his armor scorched but his resolve unshaken. He turned to the crowd, his voice echoing through the silence. They thought they could break you, he said, his tone steady and unwavering. They thought they could take everything from you and face no consequences. But today you've seen what happens when humanity fights back. The villagers stared at him, their expressions a mix of fear, gratitude and something else, something they hadn't felt in years.